Hello, welcome to another Azure Centric Podcast on our Azure Weekly Updates. My name is Marcos Nogueira and I'm your host for these podcasts this week. So this week we have pretty good announcements. Some of them are retirement, a lot of about Azure Storage, but I think we have a pretty good week on Azure, so we can go forward and start rolling. So before I start, as usual, I like to thanks to everyone, especially you that are listening to this podcast. So if you want to help us on the channel, just subscribe, just give some comments, provide some kind of feedback so we can improve. The idea over here is to going over the Azure updates that we have every single week, and I will give you my honest opinion regarding how is that important for an infrastructure architect like me and someone that is working on the field. So a lot of I know that it's difficult to just keep up with Azure updates. Every single week we have new updates, depending on the week, depending on the month that we're talking about. But this week we have good updates. So let's move to the first one. The first one is the classic VM retirement. Extending the retirement. So Microsoft is extending the retirement to September 1st, 2023. This is already been the second extended, if I remember correctly, that Microsoft already give to all of us, that they are still using what's called the ASM, the Azure Service Manager, okay? And you need to move to the ARM, the Azure Resource Manager. So Azure Service Manager, as I mentioned probably on this podcast, it's what I call the version 1 of Azure. So it was the first release. You have already a few years, and it was a good platform at the time. But then Microsoft improved it, okay, with Azure Resource Manager, the IRM. That is the current version that we have right now. So what does this mean to you in this case that you are listening to the podcast? So from September 1st, 2023, okay, Microsoft will decommission, in this case, the ASM. So if you have any type of workload, virtual machine, everything that you have on ASM, Microsoft is extending you to until September 1st to move out of that platform. So what does that mean to you? Means that if you don't have a machine, okay, that is on ASM and you don't move to the ARM until September 1st, your machine is going to stop. You're going to lose access to that workload. So it's highly recommended that you going and you plan as soon as possible that move from the ASM platform, that is a version 1, like I mentioned, to the second part or to the most updated version of Azure, that is the ARM. Okay, there are different ways that you can do it. Okay, you can contact, in this case, the Azure migration support. For example, you have a lot of free support capabilities that you have inside of Azure. We already mentioned a few of them on this podcast that you can move it away from the old platform. Okay, so you will see a lot of mentioning on documentation about what's called the classic virtual machines. So the classic virtual machines are based on ASM, the Azure Service Manager. Okay, and the new virtual machines, when you can deploy it, right now you can only deploy on Azure Resource Manager. Okay, so it's really important to get away from the old platform. So in this case, Microsoft can completely discommission this old platform and starting to have everything on new, because and they give you the extended date until September 1st, right? I think it's important for you to understand a lot of things. You have a lot of benefits of using the new platform instead of having old. Practically, from my experience, all the workload that you already have on the classic VMs, you can migrate those to RM. Of course, that you need to plan, because there is a downtime during that process. Okay, there is all of the things that you need to change, so it needs a plan. If it's a mission critical, I highly recommend you to just doing right now a planning, okay, before the end of time, because it will give you a little bit more heads up and more time if anything goes wrong in this case with that particular VM. Okay, but again, it should be fairly easy and fairly straightforward. Okay, there is a lot of documentation that you can see it. I did provide a few of those, and if you don't find it, you know where you can find Azure Centric, right? Or in all the platforms that you can see it. We are there to support you and to help you as well. Okay, moving to the next one. That is a public preview of Container Insights support for AKS hybrid clusters. So this is pretty awesome, because when you deploy AKS, right, when you deploy the Azure Kubernetes services, usually you deploy a lot of containers, right? You deploy a lot of pods, but having insight of what's going on those containers, right? Like seeing what is the performance of those containers, seeing how is your pod performance, if you are having probably the number of containers, all of those type of things regarding monitoring. Right now, with this public preview, you can have as similar as the application insights, that in a lot of applications you can see it, what's going on. Now, with this, you can see what's going on inside of your AKS, okay? And the beautiful of this, right, is that now you can extend that life cycle to the Azure Stack HCI. So meaning that even on premise, right, then when you deploy the Azure Stack HCI, you are able to now see what's going on your containers. So no matter where you're going to deploy it, if it's on fully on Azure, or if you are doing a deployment on-premise using Azure Stack HCI, now you can see the performance and you can identify the key resources and all the bottlenecks that you have inside of your cluster of AKS, right? So pretty good. Still in public preview, I have to say. So be careful with that. Try to see where you can do it. But again, this is one of the aspects of, because it's a monitoring, right? It's not like you are totally deploying the AKS in public preview. It's just a monitoring. Probably evaluating on something that is on production, it will not affect too much, okay? But be careful, because when you are deploying, when this became a GA, you might need to redeploy everything again. So, and if you have any issues with the container insights, you have to remember that this is not with SLA yet, because it's public preview, it's on best effort, okay? I just want you to know, we cover this part of the public preview a lot on this podcast, and it's always good to reinforce that, right? Moving to the next one, this is a pretty cool one. Is a GA, so it's now available, that you have now 5 gigabits of put on Blob. So this is cool, because you used to have before, okay, a 60. So the version until 2016, if I'm not mistaken, it was 4 megs. So what is this? What does this mean? Means that your Azure Storage now is announcing that you can do upload, okay, nearly 20 times the previous limit. So when they starting with Azure Storage, was a limit of 4 megs. for example. This was around 2016, if I'm not mistaken. And then in 2019, okay, they announced that you can do it 100 megs. So it was something that was allow you to do it on 100 megs, meaning that the maximum size, okay, at that time was 256 megs. Okay, right now they are extending that limit for you to upload on the single file from 256 to 5 gigs. Okay, to 5 gigabytes to just upload on a single one. Okay, so it's pretty cool that now the Azure Storage, on using the REST API, you can now use the upload on the single write operation up to 5 gigabits. So allows you to just transfer that data, okay, way faster, and upload that data to the Azure Storage way faster regarding this. So pretty cool, this announcement that they did it, right? It will facilitate a lot of those moments when you need that availability, when you need that bandwidth to just upload those files, even using REST API. So pretty powerful when you want to do that. Staying on the same subject as the Azure Storage, right? Now the new update is the general availability of mount of Azure Storage as a local share in app service Windows code. So what does that mean? Mean that you have an app service, right? So a web app, for example, that you have there. The way that you can connect with other web apps, right? It was really limited. With this option, you can basically mount a file share. Okay, you can mount an Azure Storage file share as a network share on the Windows code, in this case, non-container app service, that you can do it, okay, as a persistent storage for your app service. Meaning that, for example, if you want to share logs, and if you want to create a central storage for your logs on your different app service plans, now you can do it. Okay, it's not applicable only for that. If you have videos, for example, imagine this. Imagine that now you have an app service across multiple regions, and you want to have that video, you want to upload that video, okay, even without the CDN, okay, the content delivery network. Even if you don't have that, now you can centralize that storage, because storage can be geo-replicated as well across different regions. So when you upload that, you let all the Azure in the backend to level all of that storage in the backend, right? To replicate for you that. You upload once, and every single app service plan will have that available across, for example, multiple regions. So this could be applicable to a lot of ways. So now you have a specific location, kind of a shared disk, let's per se, but it's not a VM, that you can use for app service on a Windows code again, okay, that allows you to just have that shared location across multiple app service. It's pretty cool. It's GA, so you can use right now in production, and I see a lot of good utilization of this feature. It's a well deserved feature for the app service plan. I use a lot app service plan, and this makes it way more simple, even for logs, because now you can have a centralized Azure Storage that you can grab those logs and you can ingest, for example, in Sentinel. So now you don't have to have multiple app service, because it's basically the same server or the same, for example, code if you are deploying across multiple regions. So it's pretty cool that you have this functionality right now on Azure available to you for app service plans, right? It's really cool. Moving to the next one is the general availability of application security groups support for private endpoints. So we in this case, me on this podcast, we talk a lot about security, about private endpoints, that you should not have, for example, any type of public IPs available on your infrastructure. There is no need for that right now. And private endpoints will culminate with that technology to just ending those type of public services. So if you want any type of public service, for example, you can have between the firewalls and the internet, you can have everything being trafficking, right? So if you are only using those type of services, even if they are Azure services, public service, you can use the private endpoints, okay? So that's the reason for using that. Although you can create network security groups, if you are familiar with that, right? So network security groups is the way that you can basically control what's called the east to west kind of traffic, okay? It's not a firewall, but it's something that you can use to just segregate and control your network. So with the principle of using, in this case, on the same network, on the same VNet, you can have multiple subnets. By default, those subnets that you have on that virtual network, they are open. So the way that I can control the traffic from the same subnet, not same subnet, within the subnets, right? On the same VNet is by using network security groups. Application security groups, it's another way that you can do it to control on the application. On a network security group, basically, I'm doing the control of networking. So subnet, IP range to IP range to the port. On the application, I can go to the protocol, for example. But when you create private endpoints that they are associated, in this case, with any type of subnet, you can apply application security groups and network security groups to the NIC. In this case, but on private endpoints, because you don't have a NIC specifically, right? You're just creating that private endpoint on that subnet. You are not able to create or to apply application security groups to private endpoints. From now, you can. So it's another way to increase your security, to segregate, to have even granular controls on your private endpoints. This is huge because, for example, if you have an Azure security, an Azure SQL instance, and that you can assign a private endpoint to that, now you can apply the security group to that Azure SQL. So you don't need to go to the network. You don't need to go to the subnet to basically create a subnet inside mostly for that Azure security or Azure SQL to apply those application security groups. So right now, if you want, you can have a subnet with multiple private endpoints, for example, multiple Azure SQL instance, that by the private endpoint, you can now apply your Azure security groups. So meaning that you can now have a granular control on which type of network is going to be on that subnet, which is great because you can have a multiple tiered application, like a 3-tier application, like a web, an application, and a database, for example, and you can place all your Azure SQL on the same subnet and now have a better control on who is the app that is going to access that specifically Azure SQL instance, for example. So gives you way more possibilities. And the beautiful of all of these updates, and I highly recommend you going in this case to the site, right, to the blog post, is it's available to the majority of the Azure regions across the world. Because when these GAs coming, and you will see in a few updates that we've been talking over here, it's a lot of times they are releasing these updates, right, for specific regions, and then they are progressing. In this case, is one of the few that I see that is basically deploying to huge amount of regions on Azure, which is really good because it will create, in this case, another layer of security specifically for that. So pretty awesome that now we have this possibility to even go further, and we even go on a direction of the zero trust module, the zero trust architecture, right? Pretty awesome. I'm really excited about this. It was really needed in the Azure environment, right? So moving to the next one is talking about the general availability of indirect enterprise agreement on Azure cost management and billing. Azure cost management is always one of the topics that when I'm talking to a lot of my customers, right, and a lot of organizations that I work with, it's key, because to have a better control on the way that you are deploying regarding governance and regarding the costs, right, to operationalize that, it's key, it's fundamental, right? Right now, what does this mean? Means that all of the enterprise agreements, the way that they could manage, in this case, their costs, was to the EA portal, the enterprise agreement portal. Right now, even in the indirect enterprise agreement, they can manage and take advantage of all the things that you have available on your Azure cost management, okay, inside of Azure, inside of the portal. So they can, for example, use the resource groups that you have with, for example, the cost center, apply that costs, see what's going to be the cost, see what's going to be the usage, programming that generate all of those type of reports, and create subscriptions for there. You don't need to switch back and forth from portal, from the EA portal to the Azure portal. So it's pretty awesome that you can see these type of updates even for those small little details. And you know that if you are using enterprise agreement, this is welcome into the Azure world. Okay. Last but not least, it's a very important update. It's the public preview of the incremental snapshots for the ultra disk storage. So the ultra disk storage are the fastest disks that you have available for a VM, right? They are the most expensive, but they are the fastest one. And now, by doing this public preview, again, and here it's very, very curious because it's not for all of the regions. It's just for the Sweden Central and US West 3. You have the possibility of on this public preview to increment your snapshots. What does that mean? Means that now you have this capability of particularly important for customers, right? That you can create a backup, for example, a snapshot of that particular storage. In this case, the ultra disk storage. So meaning that even if it's the fastest, okay, you can create those snapshots for ultra disk and now reply those or recover those to standard HDD to save. Because if you want to recover this snapshot, you don't need to recover to the ultra disk. You can recover to the cheapest tier because you are just recovering the files that you need. It's important, for example, to ensure your business connectivity, to just have another defense against ransomware if you are really need to do that. So it's pretty good update that you have available on Azure, right? And with that, we finish our podcast on this week. I hope you guys like it. Don't forget to subscribe the channel. It will help me a lot to just promote. If you want to share, you have my consent to share. And again, if you have anything to just comment, or if you want to help the channel, just giving a thumbs up and let me know what you think about these updates. Do you think it's important for you? Do you think it's going to be applicable? Let me know. Okay? So I hope that I can see you next week. Thank you for now. Bye.